This is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Otelli Edwards. Tonight's top stories from East Asia. Beijing's biggest economic boost since the pandemic, a $140 billion lifeline for China's economy and markets, includes slashing bank reserve requirements and reducing interest rates. Now, with Japan's LDP leadership race heating up, we zoom in on the youngest contender. Shinjiro Koizumi gains front-runner status, but what obstacles stand in his way of helming the ruling party? Japanese PM Fumio Kishida vows to resolutely defend the nation's territory after a Russian patrol plane violates its airspace, prompting Tokyo to lodge a protest with Moscow. And China's top diplomat urges Japan to handle the fatal stabbing of a schoolboy in Shenzhen with calm and reason, while reaffirming Beijing's commitment to safeguarding foreign nationals. Ahead on East Asia Tonight, our special coverage of China ahead of its 75th founding anniversary. We delve into Changsha, a central region that has seen its fortunes turn in recent years. It now attracts not just domestic tourists, but also people who want to relocate. And Singapore's former Transport Minister Estes Warren pleads guilty to receiving gifts while in office after prosecutors amend the charges against him on the first day of trial. China has unveiled a massive stimulus package that will inject around 1 trillion yuan, or more than $140 billion of long-term liquidity into the financial market. The slew of measures includes cuts to the reserve requirement ratio and mortgage rate for existing housing, as well as tools to support the stock market. Well, that's as China continues to face weak domestic demand and a flagging housing market, all while trying to hit this year's GDP growth target of around 5%. Well, CNA's Tan Sihui with this report.
A significant package to inject some much-needed confidence into the economy. That's what some analysts are calling China's latest round of stimulus. Among the moves, a cut to the reserve requirement ratio, or RRR, which is the amount of cash the commercial banks must hold in reserve. Also, lowering interest rates of existing mortgage loans, which would benefit 150 million people across the country, according to the governor for the People's Bank of China.
那么从宏观层面来说呢，经济回稳向好的态势呢将进一步巩固和增强。那么我们这一次人民行出台的一个比较强的这样的一个货币政策，它将会有助于支持实体经济，促进居民消费和提振市场信心。第二呢，就是我们的国际收支方面呢，还是保持的基本平稳。 上半年的经常账户的顺差与 GDP 的比是在1.1%，应该说处在一个比较合理的区间。
Markets rallied on Tuesday after China unveiled the measures, despite no specific dates for when they'll take effect. But analysts say the moves were expected, following the gloomy economic outlook, which could affect growth targets.
We do think that there is a good chance that China will hit the 5% growth target for 2024. But again, talking about growth targets is one thing. They are also looking out for quality of growth and and also what potentially happens in 2025. Because as of now, they will not just be wondering, oh, are we going to hit 2024's target? They will be thinking about what growth target to set in 2025.
Amid the ailing property market, authorities have also announced a cut in the minimum down payment requirement to 15% on all types of homes. That's as a number of measures, including removing home purchase restrictions, fail to boost confidence.
同时，我们也指导银行保险机构积极配合化解房地产和地方政府债务风险。当前，我国金融业，尤其是 大型金融机构经营稳健，风险可控。伴随房地产、地方债以及中小金融机构三大风险逐步化解和缓释，金融风险正在稳步收敛。我们会坚决守牢不发生 系统性金融风险的底线。
Some analysts believe these measures came a little too late, but they say better late than never. Yet at the same time, to sustain the stock market rally, they say China needs stronger policies, and this includes a hard crackdown on fraud and stronger support from state-backed funds.
The Chinese economy requires a far more direct and far more broad housing support to help them consume more goods, and not just goods that the Chinese government wants them to consume, but also in terms of services as well.
Chinese authorities also acknowledged that major economies have entered a rate-cutting cycle, including the U.S. Federal Reserve last week, but say uncertainties remain in the external environment. Tan Su-hui, CNA, Beijing.
After hearing those far-reaching announcements, let's turn to Roland Lim now, who will be telling us more about how financial markets reacted to those announcements.
I'll tell you, it's been a sea of green from the get-go. Greater China markets rallying on the fresh stimulus measures. Hong Kong stocks jumped the most in 7 months, rising 4.13% at the close. Shanghai Composite is also up by about the same margin, 2,863 points. The second bourse, the Shenzhen component, is up 4.36%. They're also getting a lift from news that there is a swap facility that China is setting up to support the stock market. This would let brokerages, mutual funds and insurers tap funding from the central bank. The initial size of the share swap, $71 billion. Meantime, the onshore renminbi strengthening against the US dollar, while the yield on China's benchmark 10-year government bond has rebounded from a record low. A key beneficiary of the measure is the property sector. The Hang Seng Mainland Properties Index surged 5.15% in Hong Kong. Leading the charge were mainland developers listed in Hong Kong. China Resources Land soaring nearly 6%. China Overseas Land closing 5% higher. The Chinese stimulus measures also lifting sentiment across other East Asian stock markets. The Nikkei 225 ending the day 0.57% higher. In Seoul, the Kospi up by more than 1.1%. And the Taiwan weighted index is up 2/3%. And stay tuned for more when I'll be speaking with Tommy Seah, economist, head of Greater China Research from OCBC Bank, on whether China's latest stimulus will move the needle.
Well, certainly looking forward to that, Roland. All right, in other news, Japan's ruling Liberal Democratic Party will pick a new leader on Friday. A record 9 candidates are running to replace Prime Minister Fumio Kishida as LDP president and leader of Asia's second-largest economy. A front-runner in recent polls is 43-year-old Shinjiro Koizumi, son of former Premier Junichiro Koizumi and a one-time environment minister. Now, if he wins, he would be the youngest PM in post-war Japan. CNA's Mitchell Ishida has a report.
Everywhere he goes, Shinjiro Koizumi draws a crowd. The 43-year-old is the youngest candidate in the Liberal Democratic Party presidential election. Mr. Koizumi became a national lawmaker when he was 28 in 2009. He inherited the lower house seat in Yokosuka, Kanagawa Prefecture from his father, former Prime Minister Junichiro Koizumi, a widely popular leader when he was in office between 2001 and 2006. In 2019, then Prime Minister, the late Shinzo Abe, who once served as senior Koizumi's chief cabinet secretary, appointed the son of his former boss as environment minister. Shinjiro Koizumi held the job until Yoshihide Suga, Mr. Abe's successor, stepped down in 2021. That remained the only cabinet post that he's ever held. Still, his star is rising in the party. Branding himself as a pragmatic reformist like his father, he pledged to immediately dissolve parliament for a snap election if he wins the LDP presidency. He also vowed to be decisive in handling the political fund scandal that has plagued the party since last November. Lawmakers from powerful factions have been accused of pocketing funds raised at political campaigns without declaring them. It led to the downfalls of party heavyweights, including Prime Minister Fumio Kishida's cabinet members. Two factions, including the Kishida faction, were disbanded following the scandal, with a few others in the process of being dissolved. Mr. Koizumi does not belong to any factions. This has won him support of those who want to see change. Still, his upstart image may cost him support from party old guards who may see him as being too progressive. Michio Ishida, CNA, Tokyo.
For more, let's bring in Michio Ishida, and she's joining us live from Tokyo. So, Mitch, we know that Mr. Koizumi, he's ahead in many polls. And aside from his famous last name, what's behind his popularity?
Well, Otali, Mr. Koizumi is outspoken and he speaks in short sentences that can grab public attention. His family is quite glamorous. Aside from his father being a former prime minister, his older brother is a popular actor, Kotaro. His wife is a well-known TV personality, Crystal Takigawa. They have 2 children. It's no secret his parents divorced when he was an infant. Mr. Koizumi disclosed more about his personal life during this election campaign. Now, what he said was he grew up thinking his aunt was his real mother. He didn't know he had a younger brother who was born after the divorce. He met his younger brother for the first time when he was going to college and was surprised to notice his brother's resemblance to his father. Now, Mr. Koizumi met his birth mother for the first time this year, but critics are not sure why he talked about his separated family. Maybe personally he wanted to draw attention to his story.
That's very interesting family background he's been brought up in. I just want to touch on what you've mentioned in your report earlier, Michio. You said that some people are worried that Mr. Koizumi is simply too progressive for a relatively conservative party and perhaps also lack of experience. But what are some of the other challenges and obstacles you think he'll face if he's elected as the next leader?
Well, okay, his main agenda is political reform. He's pledged for reform in a year, and it's on the back of political funds scandal. And he wants to clarify the flow of political funds. He said, without such reform, the public will not listen to the Liberal Democratic Party. And so he wants to dissolve parliament for a snap election as soon as he's elected to office to face the verdict of the public. And critics are monitoring if he is serious about party reform. That is, will he decide not to field candidates who have not reported their political funds? Now, he wants to change the social system, too, which has been maintained by, by reforming the labor law. Japan's big companies have traditionally followed lifetime employment. But Mr. Koizumi has been stating it's an obstacle from encouraging Japanese to take on new challenges, as in joining small, medium-sized enterprises and startups. He wants to change that. And he also wants to nurture new industries and ease the law to enable that. He wants to amend the law so couples can choose to have different surnames upon registration for their marriage. And he wants to legislate that law in a year. But this proposal is not supported by conservatives in the LDP. So there are various reforms he wants to bring, but the question is, will he be able to handle resistance within his own party?
That's right. And what about foreign policy, though? I mean, North Korea, clearly, always a major security concern for Japan. But does Mr. Koizumi have a concrete position on this issue?
Okay, well, whoever becomes the LDP president, the strong alliance with the U.S. is expected to be maintained. And if you can recall, former Prime Minister Taro Aso visited Mr. Donald Trump in New York in April to confirm the importance of alliance in case Mr. Trump returns to office. Another issue is ties with China. This is, of course, crucial for Japan, as China is Japan's largest trading partner. But under Mr. Kishida, improvement was limited. Most lately, a positive direction was set to resume discussion on seafood export following the discharge of treated radioactive water from the crippled Fukushima nuclear plant. However, Mr. Shinjiro's father, the elder Mr. Koizumi, strained ties with China, also with South Korea. He visited the controversial war shrine in Tokyo, and these two countries didn't like it, as Class A war criminals were honored there. Mr. Shinjiro has not been clear about whether he will visit the shrine. As to North Korea, Mr. Shinjiro wants to resolve the abduction issue. Back in 2002, his father brought home 5 Japanese abducted to North Korea in the 1970s, and no other abductees have returned to Japan since. And Mr. Shinjiro wants to meet North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. Here's his comment.
同世代同士のトップになりますから、父親同士が会ってますから、そういった歴史の中で関係を築いたことの礎のもとにですね、今までのアプローチにとらわれない、前提条件をつけない、同世代同士、新たな対話の機会を模索したい。
Well, Shinjiro Koizumi gave this comment at the National Press Club during the LDP candidates debate. Critics were actually not amused. In the same debate, he was asked how he would handle the G7 summit in Canada next year. He said Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau was 43 years old when he became Prime Minister, and they would have something in common. Now, political watchers were not amused with this comment either. The public support for Mr. Shinjiro began to slide after his various comments and debates because it reflected his lack of experience. But still, analysts think Mr. Shinjiro will gain votes from LDP Diet members as he can save them from losing seats in the general election. But to face former Prime Minister Yoshihiko Noda, who's been elected president of the largest opposition on Monday, critics say Mr. Shinjiro is of no match. So even if he does become the youngest prime minister of Japan, critics say he may not last very long.
Wow, so still all up in the air. Who is going to be leading the LDP race? Well, thanks very much for that report, Michio Ishida, speaking to us live from Tokyo. Well, we're going to go for a short break now, but coming up next on East Asia tonight, Nepon Steel addresses the workers of its takeover target US Steel directly as it reaffirms its commitment to the $15 billion deal. And another Chinese car maker committing to invest in manufacturing facilities in Vietnam. This time it's Chile.
Welcome back to East Asia Tonight. Circling back to our top story on China's stimulus announcement, we have with us Tommy Xie. He is economist and head of Greater China Research at OCBC Bank to discuss whether the latest efforts will really move the needle. Tommy, good to have you with us. Let's start with the stimulus measures being described as a stimulus blitz akin to firing a policy bazooka at the economy. In your opinion, are these rhetoric the most aggressive measures yet?
Oh, yes, I think it's quite aggressive and quite targeted. But to be honest, I didn't really pay much attention to the interest rate cuts or triple R cut, etc. Because to be honest, it's not the first time PBOC cut the triple R, cut the interest rate, right? So it happened before. But this time, you look at the market reaction, it's a good testimony to the effectiveness of the policy. So the question, of course, is why this time is different, right? Why in the past, when China cut triple R, cut interest rate, they're not really working very well? So I think to understand this problem, I think we need to understand currently the current status of the economy. In China, the economy is facing, we call it the downward spiral, right? But what's the root cause of the downward spiral? I think there's a 3 root cause. Number 1 is the consumer confidence is weakening because there's no income growth, there's no income expectation, there's no wealth effect. Number 2 is the corporate confidence is weakening, partially because of the the callback of the tax. There's a lot of investigation ongoing. Number 3 is also the government credibility is kind of dampened. I mean, for a few reasons. I mean, first reason because so far the policy didn't work very well. Second is also local government has no money, right? So I think to me the question is, are we able to address those root causes? I think that's the most important. But looking at today's comprehensive measures, some of them are able to address those root causes of the downward spiral. So in other words, we are seeing the measures may potentially reverse the downward spiral. So I think that's important in my opinion. That's why I think today the market reaction is strong and good, right? So I think from that perspective, I think it will help, in the medium term to restore the confidence in the economy.
Tommy, let's talk about some of these root causes. Domestic consumption in China is still in the doldrums. What's to be done about that?
Well, I think the problem about the consumption is, as I mentioned, I think the consumption is a function of three things, right? Number one is your income growth. Number two is your income expectation. Number three is your wealth effect. So unfortunately, those three things are not doing very well. You look at the income tax, for example. Year to date, the income tax down 5.2%. So that tells us we are seeing the slowdown in the income growth. Same as the expectation, same as the wealth effect. So going back to today's announcement again, one of the interesting things really to me is the announcement to support the equity markets. So I think this to me is important because we look at the wealth effect. There's only two ways you can get wealth effect, either via the equities or via the properties. I think property, unfortunately, is not the right place right now in China to get the wealth effect. That left with the equity markets. That's why I think today's stabilization fund to support the equity market is important. If the market can continue to rally, we are going to see, the potential revival of the animal spirits. So that may be good news for the consumption in the medium term.
What about then the shoring up of confidence in the property sector? I mean, China reducing the vast stock of unsold housing to many is really seen as crucial to restoring home buyer confidence.
Yes, I think this is, to me, is also quite important. In terms of the cutting the down payment ratio for the second house or cutting the existing mortgage rates, I think that helps, but that's not going to turn around the game. But what's important is how can you rebalance demand and the supply right now, right? Because we know in China, the problem right now is imbalanced demand and the supply. Demand is weak, but supply is still very high. So I think just now you mentioned, how are you able to convert some of the unsold units into the affordable housing. In particular, now the central bank is giving 100% loan, right, to the local government, because we know local government has no money. But if you can get 100% loan from the central bank to convert some of the unsold units to the affordable housing, that is one of the ways to digest the oversupply issue. So that may potentially to help rebalance the supply and the demand. But again, eventually, to me, if we need to see a sustainable rally of the rebound of the property market, we need to see how the income growth is doing and how the income and expectation is doing. So I think eventually it's still going back to the income levels. I think that to me is a fundamental issue for the property market.
Let's talk about the growth drivers for the Chinese economy. Chinese exporters are coming under increasing stress. Electric vehicles, steel, solar panels. Other countries are slapping tariffs or are in discussions to do so. How are today's announcements supposed to help them?
Well, I don't see the direct impact on those, trade-related stuff. I mean, to be honest, just now we talk about the low cost, right? We mentioned the corporate, household, government. I think one of the low costs has not really been touched by today's announcement is really the corporates. So there's not much thing about how to address the concern from the corporate, whether being the concern domestically or whether being the concern from the tariff or from the trade war, etc. So I think this something is still missing. I think we need to see more measures, in particular from the fiscal side. How are we going to address the concern? But again, if the sentiment is coming back, right? If the animal spirit is coming back, I think indirectly those companies may also benefit, because I think that's, for me, eventually it's about sentiment. It's about confidence. So if we have the confidence, we have the sentiment, even though we are not growing 5% this year, I mean, it's fine. Whether it's 4.8 or 4.7, I think as long as the sentiment is coming back, I think the overall outlook will be much better for the individuals as well as for those companies.
Tommy, I appreciate those insights. That was Tommy Xie, Head of Greater China Research at OCBC Bank. And Nepon Steel reaffirmed its commitment to the $15 billion buyout of U.S. Steel in a direct letter to employees of the American firm. Now, Nepon Steel also tried to clear the air on what it calls incorrect claims by United Steelworkers Union's leadership regarding the deal. Nepon Steel's vice chairman, Takahiro Mori, who signed the letter, is the key negotiator in the deal. Now, he urged the USW leadership to seriously consider Nippon's proposal. Just last week, the U.S. National Security Panel reviewing the takeover said they would allow companies to refile their application for approval. Now, this has delayed the decision until after the U.S. presidential election in November. The issue has become a political flashpoint. Both frontrunners, Kamala Harris and Donald Trump, have publicly opposed the deal. A Chinese car maker, Geely Auto, is joining its peers to invest more to assemble vehicles in Vietnam. Now, this is part of a series of commitments worth around $170 million for automakers to expand production in the country. Geely will build a plant in Vietnam that can produce 75,000 cars a year in a joint venture with Hanoi-based Tasco Joint Stock Company. Geely will contribute 36% to the total investment, with the rest coming from Tasco. The Chinese automaker will also invest in building the local supply chain and establishing a research and development center. Geely's commitments come shortly after Chinese officials reportedly urged car makers to export more so-called knock-down kits to their overseas plants. This means making key parts of a car in China before sending them for final assembly in their destination market. And that is the latest in business. Otelli.
Well, thanks so very much for that report, Roland. We're going to go for another short break, but coming up on East Asia tonight, we'll take a deep dive into the economic potential of China's central regions with CNA's Olivia Seong and our special guest, Perry Wong. Beijing's biggest economic boost since the pandemic, a $140 billion lifeline for China's economy and markets, includes slashing bank reserve requirements and reducing interest rates. China's top diplomat urges Japan to handle the fatal stabbing of a schoolboy in Shenzhen with calm and reason, while reaffirming Beijing's commitment to safeguarding foreign nationals. And Singapore's former Transport Minister S.S. Warren pleads guilty to receiving gifts while in office after prosecutors amend the charges against him on the first day of trial. The city of Changsha in central China is known for a range of things, from stinky tofu to being the entertainment capital of the country. And it draws not just tourists, but also many who want to relocate there from around the country. Well, as China marks the 75th anniversary of the People's Republic this year, CNA's Olivia Seong finds out how its central regions have gone from forgotten child to key players in the next phase of its development.
It's been 3 years since 29-year-old Shi Honghong and her husband made the bold move to leave the first-tier city of Shanghai, where they've lived for close to a decade, choosing to call the city of Changsha in central China's Hunan Province home instead.
上海的话是我觉得是大多数人向往的一座繁华的都市。那么虽然说它的一个薪资水平也更高，就是一线城市的房价确实蛮高，买不了房，但是你又面临着要结婚生孩子。比起活在一个城市，我觉得说生活在这个城市是更加重要的。长沙相对上海来说，生活的烟火气非常的浓，在这边的生活更加张弛有度一些。就是说它也会有加班呀，但是你相对来说你会有更多的精力去平衡工作和生活。
Changsha has ranked among the top 10 happiest cities in China for 16 straight years, and in the last 3 years has been among cities in the central region that have seen the largest population growth, Changsha taking top spot in 2022. Its other claim to fame is that China's late founding leader, Mao Zedong, got his revolutionary start in Changsha, studying in the city during his formative years. A statue of him as a youth standing in the center of the city, now a popular tourist attraction.
长沙是个红色的革命区啊，所以说伟人也是属于长沙的啊，所以说全国来旅游的人来定居的人也是很多的。 一个城市要发展，必须要有人口啊。
But Changsha didn't always enjoy such a lively reputation.
Well, I can tell you it gets pretty hot here in the day in Changsha, especially in the summer. And so you can see at this popular tourist spot, it's not too crowded at the moment. But at night, this place comes alive.
The development of China's central region lagged behind others during the country's reform and opening up era in the 80s and 90s, as resources were focused on the booming coastal cities. That fate changing partly due to favorable government policies under what was dubbed the Rise of Central China Plan in 2004. The city seizing opportunities to develop pillar industries, earning it a new first-tier city status in 2017.
Population are refocusing in those areas, and also there's very strong technological and industrial clustering conditions to support their future development.
Also calling Changsha home is this Chinese electric vehicle giant. Based in Changsha since 2009, BYD put the city on the map and has continued to expand with strong local government support. That BYD has chosen Changsha as its base was not something to be taken for granted. Local authorities pulled out all the stops. In 2019, to ensure BYD set up its new electronics factory, media reported how local officials made multiple site visits to resolve water and electricity issues, and even helped to recruit over 2,000 workers for the company in a month.
Changsha is really, in a sense, a hub for the central region, and especially in the automotive sector, and obviously attracts many, many resources and many companies to the region that may coexist and co-supply its customers. But I think that more important is the fact that when you have a city in a region that is becoming fiercely competitive in a global context, it's very important that the surrounding region also benefit from the success of the city.
With its economy struggling to bounce back from the 3-year COVID malaise, China needs more success stories such as that of Changsha. But with the internal and external headwinds that it's facing, it's also more difficult than before for other cities to replicate the Changsha model. Olivia Xiong, CNA, Changsha.
And for more on China's economic trajectory beyond its 75th founding anniversary, we are joined by our correspondent, Olivia Xiong, and Milken Institute's Managing Director of Research, Perry Wong. Now, Mr. Wong is also the author of the latest Best Performing Cities China report. Now, just released earlier this month, the index saw Hangzhou, the capital of Zhejiang Province, moving up 7 places to be the best performer among first and second-tier cities this year. Notably, former COVID epicenter Wuhan takes second spot. 3 other cities in a central region, Changsha, Nanchang, and Hefei, made it to the top 10. The index considers 15 indicators, including growth in jobs, average wages, and the share of foreign-funded industrial enterprises. So let's just kick things off. Our panel first, over to you, Mr. Wong. We heard Olivia's story there about China's central region. If we were to take a more macro view, how big is the disparity in development between China's various regions? Help us understand, because I would imagine that this would pose a challenge to the authorities, wouldn't it?
Well, I think if you take Beijing, for example, its per capita income is about 4.3 times of that of a province in Gansu. So that's a very huge number. Now, that's a dollar sign measurement. But in terms of economic reality, the gap actually most revealing in education, healthcare, and economic opportunities. So it's not a small gap. Certainly about 17 of the 34 city provinces, 17 of them actually are below the mean of per capita income. So there's quite a gap for the middle region to catch up, and also the West as well.
Right, and Mr. Wong, just want to dive a little bit deeper into the report. We talked about Hangzhou, which is ranked the best performing city, and we also know that it is home to Chinese tech firms like Alibaba. But I guess what kind of surprised me there was Wuhan, being the COVID epicenter some years ago, and it performed really well, which sort of came as a surprise. But what are some of the similarities and differences, these two top-ranked cities that place it so high up in the rankings?
The big surprise comes from actually on how strongly it rebounded. 27 positions is not a small feat. It's a huge jump. And I guess that's what I would call is due to the disastrous economic recovery, namely the pandemic. So after that, the city had to recapture this opportunity, rebuild, and all those imply one thing: huge amount of public expenditure, recruitment of company, and so on and so forth. So in the last couple of years, the economic fortune turned their way, and hence Wuhan is being propelled to the second position. Now, on top of the pandemic, I think people should not lightly look at Wuhan just another city. Actually, Wuhan is one of the most most important logistics center in China, and also is a very diverse industrial space. Almost all kind of machinery, from defense to non-defense related, heavy industry, all presented in the city. So the base is very sound.
Okay. Now, Olivia, I want to bring you in here. Wuhan, we know it's in central China, and you've been traveling around the central region for this story. I mean, China being so vast, and yet you chose to focus on this part of China, and I'm curious to know why.
Well, Ateli, many would be familiar with the bigger Chinese cities that Mr. Wong mentioned there: Beijing, Shanghai, Shenzhen, Guangzhou. Those are familiar, but a city like Changsha is not as well known. But if you're here in China, you would have heard of Changsha being called a Wanghong Chengshi, which is an internet famous city. And that really piqued my interest, because if we were to look at it, Changsha does not really have any natural advantages. It's a landlocked city. It's not near the coast or near any ports, but yet it's been able to make its mark today and becoming a very popular, not just tourist destination, but a destination that many people move to. As we saw earlier, they have been able to build strong pillar industries, whether it's in smart manufacturing or in heavy construction machinery. The city also known for many popular local brands like the milk tea brand Chayan Yuese, which has focused on having many of its 500 shops mostly within the city itself. And Changsha has also become very popular because of pop culture. It's known as the entertainment capital. Many hugely successful variety and talent shows are filmed there by the provincial media network, which is seen as a pioneer in the industry, but also bringing a lot of revenue into the city. And that, along with the population changes for this story as we look ahead to what lies ahead for the People's Republic of China as it marks its 75th founding anniversary. It was interesting to see, how the central region, which is not typically talked about, can play a role, and it is being counted on to play a role for China's next phase. I'll tell you. Well, actually, I did have a question for Mr. Wong, because as we're talking about, looking at the next phase of China's development, we also know that there is a lot of competition between the cities and provinces. What would you say have been some of the strategies that have been employed by these local governments to attract businesses and people to set up and invest within their localities?
Actually, the city started to come up with different trade, which is different than, say, 15, 20 years ago. Changsha, I think, tried to advertise for easy living, plenty of space. Actually, the first city, big city, to coin this thing as best living or easy to live city is actually from Chengdu. I think back about 8 or 9 years ago, the city government of Chengdu actually advertised on attracting talents and young professionals to the city by saying that once you get your college degree, you don't even need a job, just come live in the city and we'll find a job for you. So it actually created a big wave of new policy, new thinking by not just providing convenience to the business, but also how to attract the young talent to the city. Because they figure once you have the young people, company will likely be following those young talents as well.
Now, Ollie, so
that's unique.
Yeah, that's certainly very unique, right? How to attract these young people to these new cities to keep the momentum going. And so, Ollie, I'm wondering, China's facing all these, internal and external headwinds. What then are the key challenges for cities like Changsha to, sort of keep the momentum going?
Well, I'll tell you, there's actually a lot of pressure on the central region to, keep up with economic growth. And because it has seen a slowdown following the COVID-19 pandemic with a loss in investor and business confidence. And its economic growth has actually lagged behind other regions in China. In fact, Chinese President Xi Jinping visited in March earlier this year in Changsha, where he held a symposium saying that there is a need to have solid efforts to further energize the central region, talking about the importance of innovation in science and technology and to cultivate new productive forces, which really has been the buzzword this year as China looks to boost its struggling economy. Hunan, of which Changsha is the provincial capital of, has set an ambitious growth target of 6% for this year, which is higher than China's GDP growth target of around 5%. And there are plans to boost its imports and exports, which is interesting for a landlocked region, which, however, has benefited from improved connectivity and rail lines to Guangdong, where the ports are. There's also greater talk of, cooperation and, selling to new markets that China traditionally may not have relied on, but because of geopolitical headwinds and, for example, tariffs on goods like electric vehicles, is looking at, for example, boosting cooperation with Africa as it looks to meet those challenges and to put China into its next phase and its next frontier. Ateli.
Mr. Wong, bring you in here again. I mean, our big news for today is obviously China unveiling these new stimulus measures. Whether it's slashing bank reserve requirements or reducing interest rates, right? So how do you think these initiatives mentioned today will benefit China's central regions, which have already, as it is, demonstrated impressive growth rates of, I believe, 8.6% annually during the 13th five-year plan period?
I think the central region would get most of the benefit if you compare to others in the coastal regions, for a couple of good reasons. I think the most one is sounder economic fundamental, meaning they have been on the right base and growing industry with some central government policy in place, which I think would project them to have a higher growth. And second, in terms of the property markets, the city there probably are less burdened by some of the speculative activities and hence would receive less damage. So when the macroeconomics economy get greased up, I think they can propel their growth further. But that said, I think confidence is the issue. I think any of the city's economic growth can be sustained. I think housing market can recover and people certainly will spend. I think it's about job, and jobs.
But how well, Mr. Wong, how well buffered do you think China's economic strategy is when it comes to, because they've been focusing on tech, right, a lot, but they've also had a lot of international scrutiny surrounding its new productive forces, like whether it's in EVs or solar panels. Do you think there's going to be any adjustments in their strategy?
I don't think so, because China alone will need to digest large amount of solar panel and EVs or any of the green technology that we can think of. Because if the country has to meet its own green target by 2050 and 2060s, they probably need a lot more. That said, I think that also would help out to build the central region as well, because many of them actually need those technology. And I think the city can extend their cluster from the core center, say from Shanghai or from Shenzhen, to project the influence into regions like Changsha, or in the case of Hefei, the entire province, I think we'll need all those newly built cluster to create jobs. So it's both internal, external need that the Chinese government would create a buffer for job creation and also dampen the impact of geopolitical effects.
Well, that's been a great discussion on China's new frontiers, and I think you've given me some ideas, some places that I definitely have to visit: Changsha, Wuhan, and Chengdu. So thank you so very much for your time and thoughts. Perry Wong, Milken Institute's Managing Director of Research, and as always, our correspondent, Olivia Siong in Beijing. Thank you. Now, for more on how China is charting its new path of modernization as it marks the 75th founding anniversary of the People's Republic, CNA correspondent China's New Frontiers premieres tonight, or tomorrow night rather, at 7:30 Singapore Hong Kong time. And you can also watch it wherever and whenever you like on CNA.Asia or on YouTube. Right, time now to go for another short break, but coming up next on East Asia Tonight, Singapore's former Transport Minister, S.S. Warren, to be sentenced next month after pleading guilty to receiving gifts while in office. Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida has vowed to, quote, resolutely defend Japan's territory as Tokyo lodged a protest with Moscow after a Russian patrol plane entered its airspace. Japan confirmed the violation yesterday. The defense minister said that a Russian patrol aircraft flew over its waters north of Rebun Island on 3 occasions. The Japanese military responded by scrambling fighter jets and issuing radio and flare warnings. It's the first confirmed incursion since 2019. Now, Mr. Kishida's warning comes as Russian and Chinese warships entered the Sea of Okhotsk in the Western Pacific as part of a major naval exercise that President Vladimir Putin has described as the largest of its kind in 3 decades. Russian media say that the ships carried out tasks including joint maneuvering and countering unmanned boats of a mock enemy. The Sea of Okhotsk is located between Russia's Kamchatka Peninsula on the east and Japan's Hokkaido to the south. China's top diplomat Wang Yi met Japan's foreign minister in New York amid tensions over the fatal stabbing of a Japanese schoolboy in Shenzhen. Mr. Wang says that he hopes Tokyo will handle the incident calmly and rationally. He stressed that Japan should avoid politicizing or escalating the incident, pledging that Beijing would continue to safeguard all foreign citizens in China. Well, Tokyo demanded an explanation after last week's stabbing and wanted China to act against anti-Japanese posts on social media. The victim was reportedly a 10-year-old Japanese national whose parents were Japanese and Chinese citizens. Police have detained a 44-year-old suspect. The attack coincided with the anniversary of the Mukden incident, when Japan used an explosion on a railway as a pretext for its 1931 invasion of Manchuria. But it is unclear if the stabbing was politically motivated. Singapore's former Transport Minister S.S. Warren has been found guilty on 4 counts of obtaining valuable items as a public servant and 1 count of obstructing justice. This comes after 2 counts of corruption he faced were amended. He will be sentenced next week. CNA's Geraldine Yap with a report.
The almost 6-hour hearing delivered a few surprises, starting with the prosecution amending the 2 corruption charges to that of obtaining valuable items as a public servant. That's an offence that carries the lower maximum penalty of 2 years in jail, a fine, or both. The prosecution also decided to proceed with 5 of the 35 charges, with the rest to be taken into consideration during sentencing. Warren was solemn throughout the hearing, only speaking to plead guilty to the charges. He was seen at times taking down notes on a notebook and briefly conferred with his lawyers before the start of the trial. His lawyer, Davinder Singh, explained that while Warren had previously pleaded not guilty when first charged, that was because he wanted to contest the corruption charges. But now that those charges have been amended, he has decided to plead guilty. Both sides then made their sentencing submissions, the prosecution arguing for a jail term of 6 to 7 months and the defense a jail term of no more than 8 weeks. Among the mitigating factors cited by the defense, one was that Iswaran had paid about $380,000 back to the state and surrendered other gifts he had received, including alcohol and golf clubs. And this was done immediately after he was informed of the amended charges. The defense also said that Iswaran's charges had caused minimal to no harm to others, a point that the prosecution disagreed with. The prosecution said that the government's impartiality had been impacted by the case. Court adjourned just before 4 p.m.
As you know, my lawyers have stated the position clearly, and as you're well aware, the matter is now sub judice. So it's not appropriate for me to say anything more.
The judge asked both sides to make additional submissions by this Thursday, and he will deliver his sentence next Thursday.
And that's East Asia Tonight for this Tuesday. Don't forget your headlines anytime at cna.asia, and you can always find us on Facebook, YouTube, and on X. Thanks for watching.